So now we move into a new period, the period of the Legislative Assembly. We've had two periods, the National Assembly. Well, we've talked about the pre-revolutionary period, right? And then there's the period of the National Assembly, and now we're moving into the Legislative Assembly. So the National Assembly decides we are going to make our own laws. We're going to have our own people to do this. Well, they have to elect lawmakers. They do that. So now you have the Legislative Assembly. So everything's good, right? Now France has a legislative assembly, and they're going to run the country, and everybody should be happy. Well, of course, that doesn't hold up very long either. So now what happens? Louis tries to escape with Marie Antoinette. They try to run to Austria. The kings of Europe are very concerned about what's going on in France. So there is a coalition of European nobility and their armies to invade France. By the way, Louis and Marie try to escape, but they're unsuccessful. I pointed that out last lecture, but I want to make this really clear. They are being held prisoners in their own country. And because they tried to escape, they are now being called traitors. Now you have to think about this for a second. The king is the king. He can't be a traitor to his own country. The country is his. Except now it's not. Now it belongs to the people, and there is this sort of mass concept, the general will, and the people now controlling the state can look at him as simply a chosen head of state, a figurehead more than anything else, to represent France to other countries. But in the end, it is now our state, and he is just part of it. And if he tries to run away, well, that makes him a traitor to his own state. So that's how they viewed it at this time. So France is invaded by Austrian and Prussian troops with some help from other armies in Europe. And the French people now have a sense of identity as the French people as a government. Not just as, kind of an ethnicity thing. Not just as a linguistic group, but as a people. We are the French government. We are France. And so at this point, when these other countries invade, it becomes very personal to them. And they respond by raising up armies very quickly. The standing army at this point is now completely controlled by the Legislative Assembly. And so they are responding to the invaders and start driving them back. In fact, by the time it's over, they have gained a great amount of new territory throughout Europe. So it started out as these European powers wanting to take over France. Instead, France ends up taking over much of their country. They go back and don't just push them back to their own borders. They go beyond it. Through all of this, there are a number of French generals who become very well known, but none is more beloved by the people for his great exploits in battle as a young new general by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. So they have this new constitution, and what do? We've got all these people coming in from the outside, and you've got a lot of fighting going on. Who might be the spies for the nobilities from outside? Well, the nobilities of Europe are all sort of interconnected. So the people of France began to view their own noble or their own aristocratic class as possibly being spies or infiltrators from the outside, as helping the enemy. And so they start gathering them up and executing them by the thousands. Thinking of them as conspirators, thinking of them as potential benefactors of the foreign invasion. Okay, so the next element, because the Legislative Assembly is now over, now you have what's known as the convention. And the convention isn't like a meeting to hold, to make a decision, as we would think of a convention right now. This is referred to as the convention, as in this is now the conventional state of Europe or of France as a new republic. So that's the convention. And it lasts from 1792 to 1795. They met for the first time as the convention on September 22nd, 1792. They established the first French Republic. There's a lot of domestic problems. There were still factions fighting within them. You not only had the factions on the one side, the Sans-Culottes and the Jacobins and all of those guys who are wanting the new republic and wanting to get rid of all of the old trappings, and they have all their own infighting. But at the same time, you have another group called the Girondists who are trying to be kind of the level-headed group in the bunch. They're trying to be the mediators, the ones that say, okay, yes, we all want change, but if we get too crazy about it, things are going to get out of control and it's going to be bad for all of us. So let's just stick with keeping things slow and logical and progress in a way that is best for everyone. That's the Girondist point of view. That obviously doesn't go over very well with this group that it now is full of fervor. And at this point, they said, you know what, this whole constitutional monarchy thing that we've had, where the king is the representative of the people, let's just get rid of it. He isn't really used for anything anyway. Look, he just tried to run away. He may actually be in cahoots with the enemy. Let's just get rid of him. So the king is abolished. The whole monarchy is abolished. Now you have a problem. You can say as a group that the monarchy is abolished, but they know that the whole people of France have grown up under monarchy. They've grown up worshiping their king and queen. And there's going to be a lot of people that are still going to be ready to turn back to that. And so the people that were dedicated to the revolution, dedicated to changing things, said, as long as the monarchy lives, there is a chance that we could go back to a monarchy, as long as the monarchs themselves are still alive. So who does that mean? Well, that means Louis XVI, means Marie Antoinette, and it means their son and daughter. They had a trial for them, of course, the two adults. But the outcome of the trial was a foregone conclusion. Everyone knew what it was going to be before it ever started. So, okay, we're going to have a trial. By the way, you're guilty. And this crime against the people, against the general will, which is almost their new god, this crime against the general will is punishable by death, and therefore you are sentenced to be guillotined. Louis XVI was guillotined on January 21st, 1793, and just 10 months later, Marie Antoinette was guillotined October 16th, 1793. The daughter, Marie-Thérèse, was allowed to go to Vienna in Austria. And why is that? Well, because under their law, she was not in a line of succession. She did not have a claim to the throne. So according to French law, she actually was no longer a concern. So they allowed her to live, basically go live with her uncle, Leopold, in Austria, and that made them look good-hearted and benevolent to the people. People still wanted to believe themselves to be decent. But then what do you do about Louis Charles, or also known as Charles the 17th? Because here's the problem. He's still the heir to the throne. You can't completely be assured that the monarchy is never coming back as long as you still have an heir to the throne. So they put him in prison, but they knew that if they execute a child, that's going to make them look really, really bad. So they put him in prison, but they also know that if he stays there too long, somebody could come along and free him. So there are still monarchists. There are still people in the country that believe in the monarchy. So what do? Well, they starve him, and they beat him, and they expose him to cold until he dies. And then they broadcast, oh, well, he was kind of a weakling anyway, and he died in prison. Just goes to show you how little the monarchy really has going for him. It's kind of the way they portrayed it. The people who basically didn't want to hear anything other than that right then went along with it. And so this child was no longer a threat. And now the convention had full control of the country.